The wind in San Francisco carried a salty tang from the bay. I dragged my suitcase out of the airport doors. Mark Henderson walked ahead of me, with Brittany White following closely at his side. The driver opened the car door. Mark got in first, and Brittany followed, sliding into the back row. I stood outside the car, my 7-month pregnant belly pressed against the edge of the doorframe. "You sit in the passenger seat," Mark said, rolling down the window. "Brittany needs to go over the summit schedule with me." I pulled open the passenger door, got in, and buckled my seatbelt. The engine purred to life. The sound of pages turning came from the back seat. "Mr. Henderson, should we raise the budget here by 2%? Brittany asked. "Raise it. Those venture capitalists only care about profit margins," Mark answered. I watched the city streets blur past outside the window. 30 minutes later, the car stopped at the entrance of the Ritz-Carlton. The bellhop opened the door, and I stepped out. Mark and Brittany emerged from the other side. We walked into the lavish lobby. "You go check in," Mark said, stopping in his tracks. He handed his driver's license to me. I took the ID and walked to the front desk. The receptionist took it and typed on his keyboard. "Miss Davis, the top-floor presidential suite you booked is ready. Here are your room keys." He handed over 2 gold key cards. I reached out to take them, but a hand reached over from the side. Mark snatched one room key and then took the other directly from my fingers. I turned to look at him. "I'm taking the keys," Mark said, handing one to Brittany. "The top floor is quiet." "That's my room," I said, staring at him. "Brittany needs to revise the PowerPoint for the $10 million Series A funding." Mark frowned. "She can't be disturbed." I pointed at my belly. "I am 7 months pregnant. I need to rest." "You don't need to worry about the PowerPoint, so you can rest anywhere," Mark said dismissively. "Go to the lobby and book a new room." I took out my phone to check. The suites are fully booked. There are only standard rooms left. "A standard room is fine," Mark urged impatiently. The receptionist spoke up. "Sir, due to the Moscone Center Tech Summit, all guest rooms in our hotel were fully booked weeks ago. We currently have no vacancies." Mark froze for a second. He turned to look at Brittany. Brittany gripped the gold room key and took a step forward. "Please understand," Brittany said, looking into my eyes with a faux sympathetic smile. "There are hundreds of data points in that PowerPoint. One wrong decimal point and the funding is gone. Mr. Henderson is under a lot of pressure." "That is your job," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly calm. "I understand you usually stay at home for your pregnancy, so you don't know how things work in the real corporate world." Brittany smiled condescendingly. "The venture capital people arrive tomorrow. The suite's living room is large, making it convenient for us to lay out the documents. You can't expect Mr. Henderson to meet investors in a standard room. This hotel has no standard rooms left anyway," I reminded them. "There's one across the street." Mark pointed outside the glass doors. I followed his finger. Across the street was a row of run-down, single-story buildings. A flickering neon sign stood on the roof. "Starlight Motel." "I saw it from the car earlier," Mark said. "It advertises hourly rates, $20 an hour. Go over there and get a room." I withdrew my gaze and stared directly at Mark's face. "You want me to stay in a $20 an hour motel? You're a pregnant woman. You just need a bed to lie on." Mark snapped, sounding irritated. "You're not working. Staying in the presidential suite is a waste anyway. The room was paid for with my personal American Express card," I said. "My company is going public soon." Mark lowered his voice. "Once the $10 million funding hits the account, I'll pay you back double. Right now, the bigger picture is what matters. Don't make a scene at a time like this." "I am not making a scene." I took out my phone. "I am canceling the reservation." Mark grabbed my wrist. "Chloe, do not cross the line," he warned, a flash of anger in his eyes. "I am out here busting my ass for this family, while you sit comfortably at home being the pampered housewife. Now I ask you to give up a room to support my career, and you make excuses. Pampered housewife?" I looked at him in disbelief. "The seed money for the early days of your startup came entirely from me. When you couldn't get clients, I used my network to connect you. Now you say I'm just a housewife enjoying a life of luxury? Enough. Cut the crap." Mark let go of my hand. "Walk over there yourself. Don't make me call someone to escort you out. And don't wait up for me for dinner." He turned and walked toward the elevator bank. Brittany followed right behind him. He looked back at me once, waving the gold room key tauntingly in his hand before the elevator doors opened. They stepped in, and the doors slid shut. People bustled through the lobby. I dragged my suitcase to a plush leather sofa in the corner and sat down, placing my luggage at my feet. I took out my phone, opened the dialer, and pressed 911. Hello, San Francisco Police 911 dispatch. I need to report a crime in progress, I said. Please go ahead. The Ritz-Carlton Hotel, top floor, Presidential Suite 8801, I said, my pacing steady. There are individuals currently engaging in prostitution and illegal solicitation. Are you currently on the scene? I am in the hotel lobby. Please provide your personal information. My name is Chloe Davis. My driver's license number is... I recited the digits flawlessly. What is your relationship to the suspects? I don't know them. I lied smoothly. I just saw them go up. The woman had no luggage, and I heard the man discussing payment. Understood. We have recorded this tip. Officers from the local precinct are being dispatched immediately. Please wait in a safe area. Thank you. I hung up the phone. I opened the stopwatch app, tapped start, and watched the numbers begin to climb. I caught the attention of a passing waiter. A glass of warm water, please. Right away, ma'am. He brought the water moments later. I picked up the glass. The temperature was perfect. I looked at the grand wall clock. The second hand ticked, space by space. 2 hours and 50 minutes later. The harsh sound of screeching tires echoed from outside the hotel doors. I turned to look. 3 SFPD cruisers were parked aggressively at the bottom of the steps. The doors swung open, and 6 uniformed police officers quickly marched up the steps. The hotel's lobby manager rushed over, looking panicked. Officers, how can we assist you? We received a verified tip with full identification. Top floor room 8801 is suspected of illegal vice activities, the lead officer said, flashing his badge. Lead the way. The manager's face drained of color. He unclipped his walkie-talkie. Security department, send 2 supervisors to the top floor immediately. Hurry. The police headed toward the elevators, the manager trailing behind them. I stood up, holding my water glass, and followed them to the elevator bank. Another set of doors opened and I stepped inside, pressing the button for the top floor. When the elevator chimed at the top, I stepped out. The hallway was covered in thick, luxurious carpet that absorbed all footsteps. 2 security guards were already stationed outside room 8801. The manager was frantically swiping a master keycard against the lock. The reader flashed a rapid red light. It's dead-bolted from the inside, the manager nervously told the police. A burly officer took a step forward and banged his fist heavily against the mahogany door. SFPD! People inside, listen up! Open the door immediately! There was no response. The officer pounded again, the heavy thuds echoing down the silent corridor. Breach it! The lead officer ordered. The manager pulled out a heavy-duty master override key, inserted it into the keyhole, and forcefully turned the cylinder. A loud click sounded, and the door opened a crack before stopping. The metal safety latch was engaged. 2 officers stepped back and rammed their shoulders into the door simultaneously. Bang! The metal latch ripped out of the doorframe. The door swung wide open. The police rushed into the room. SFPD! Freeze! Put your hands where we can see them and get on the ground. A sharp, terrified shriek from Brittany pierced the air, followed by Mark's panicked, shouting. What the hell are you doing? I'm Mark Henderson. I own a tech company. Hands on your head. Crouch in the corner, an officer barked sternly. I stood at the far end of the hallway, holding my glass of water, and took a calm sip. 5 minutes later, the police escorted them out. Mark was wrapped only in a white hotel bathrobe, his hair a disheveled mess. He stepped barefoot onto the hallway carpet. Brittany was also in a bathrobe, crying hysterically and covering her face with both hands. Her shoulders shook violently. The lead officer tapped his body camera. Take them down to the station for booking. I am here for a tech summit. I am a VIP client of the Ritz-Carlton. This is a massive misunderstanding. Mark struggled violently against the officer's grip. He turned his head to look down the hallway and saw me. His movements stopped instantly. His eyes slowly widened in horror. I looked back at him, my expression blank. Chloe. Mark's voice trembled. Why are you up here? Because I'm the one who called it in, I said. The hallway went dead silent for a second. Then, Mark lunged forward like a rabid dog. 2 officers instantly slammed his shoulders against the wall, pinning him hard. Are you out of your damn mind? Mark's voice cracked. You filed a false police report. Do you have any idea what the consequences are? I didn't file a false report. I took out my phone and pulled up the booking confirmation. This presidential suite was paid for with my personal credit card. The reservation is entirely under my name. I turned the screen to the lead officer. Officer, I am the lawful occupant of this suite. I do not know these 2 people. They are illegally trespassing in my room. The officer glanced at the screen, then back to Mark. Bullshit, Mark spat, struggling against the wall. I'm her husband. Do you have any proof of marriage on you? I asked him coldly. Mark froze. You don't even have your wallet on you to prove who you are. I pulled my phone back. All I saw was a strange man and woman in my room, partially undressed. Save it for the judge, the officer said, yanking Mark upright. Let's go. Brittany crouched on the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. Miss Davis, please forgive me. I was wrong. I don't know you. I stepped aside. The police hauled Brittany up and escorted them both toward the elevator. Mark turned his head, staring dead at me, his eyes practically bulging with shock and fury. The elevator doors closed. The hallway returned to a pristine silence. The hotel manager wiped sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief and rushed up to me. Miss Davis, I am so incredibly sorry. This is a severe lapse in our security. It's not your fault, I said. I pointed to the door of room 8801. Clear every single item of theirs out of there. Throw it in the dumpster out back. Change all the bedding and disinfect the entire suite. Yes, ma'am. We will handle it immediately. The manager nodded vigorously. I followed him downstairs to the lobby. Miss Davis, to express our deepest apologies, all your dining and room service expenses during your stay will be completely complimentary, he said, handing me a fresh gold room key. Thank you. I took the key. Also, regarding tomorrow's industry summit, I looked at him sharply. You are the representative for the main venue sponsor, correct? Yes, ma'am. Please tell me if you have any instructions. Remove Mark Henderson's name from the VIP list. My tone was icy and resolute. Revoke his admission credentials entirely. Notify your security team. If he shows up at Moscone Center tomorrow, expel him from the premises immediately. The manager didn't hesitate for a second. Understood. I will make the calls right now. I took the room key, rode the elevator back up, and entered room 8801. The housekeeping staff was already rushing to change the bed sheets. I sat on the sofa, took out my phone, and dialed the premium customer service line for my bank. Hello, Miss Davis. How can I assist you today? I need to adjust the permissions on several credit cards under my account. Certainly. Which cards do you need to adjust? The 3 authorized user cards ending in 3,000, 304, 5,000, 698, and 8,821. I read out the numbers for the cards Mark held. Are you looking to adjust the credit limits? No. Freeze them. Deactivate them immediately. Miss Davis, the system shows these 3 cards are currently active in the San Francisco area. Are you sure you want to freeze them right now? Yes. Flag them as stolen to prevent fraudulent charges. Permanently lock them. Do not accept any phone or online requests to unfreeze them. Note on the account that I must personally bring my ID to a physical branch to lift the hold. Understood, Miss Davis. Processing that for you now. The rapid sound of keyboard typing echoed through the earpiece. Process successful. The 3 authorized user cards have been permanently frozen. Thank you. I hung up. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, the San Francisco sky was darkening rapidly. Thick storm clouds pressed down over the bay. The wind picked up. I rested a hand on my belly. It began to pour. The heavy rain lashed against the glass like shattering crystals. I sat back on the plush sofa, holding a cup of hot milk. My phone buzzed. It was a video message from an unknown number. I tapped play. The footage was slightly shaky, filmed outside the front doors of the SFPD precinct. Mark and Brittany were walking out. Mark was wearing his crumpled suit. Brittany was shivering, wrapped in a borrowed oversized security jacket. They stood under the concrete eaves to hide from the driving rain. Mark's furious voice came through the audio. What are you crying for? Isn't this humiliating enough? Brittany sobbed. My clothes are still at the hotel. I didn't even get to grab my phone. Didn't I pay your bail? Mark violently yanked his tie loose. The cops cleared it up. It's just a misdemeanor trespassing charge. They didn't charge us with prostitution. What more do you want? Mark took out his phone and dialed a number. Hello, Frank? Yeah, I just got out. Book a room for me. Book the Marriott right across from the Ritz. Yeah. Mark recited a string of credit card numbers. It was the authorized user card he carried. The Mark in the video waited for a long minute. What do you mean the transaction is declined? Mark yelled. Try the other card. Swipe the one ending in 5,698. He waited another minute. Declined again? That's impossible! Mark roared into the phone. I have $1 million limit on that, Amex. Try it again! Mark hung up the phone in a rage. He viciously kicked a metal trash can next to him, sending it clattering to the pavement. Empty water bottles rolled into the puddles. Mr. Henderson, what's wrong? Brittany asked cautiously. The cards have been shut off. Mark ground his teeth, his face contorted in rage. Chloe, that bitch. She canceled my credit cards. Then what do we do now? The company's cash is under audit. We can't touch it. Brittany hugged the oversized coat tightly around herself. Mark didn't answer. He just stared blankly across the rain-slicked street. I closed the video and switched to my encrypted chat app. I sent a message to the unknown number. Keep following them. Received, boss. The reply came instantly. This was the private investigator I had hired. From the moment my plane landed, he had been tailing Mark, documenting his every move. 10 minutes later, the PI sent a second video. The storm was worsening. The puddles in the street were ankle-deep. Without an umbrella, Mark and Brittany braved the torrential rain, jogging across a busy intersection. They headed toward a flickering neon sign with red background and yellow lettering. Starlight Motel. Mark shoved open the cheap glass door, Brittany trailing miserably behind him. The PI's lens zoomed in. Through the uncurtained front window, the motel lobby was perfectly visible. The clerk was a middle-aged man smoking a cigarette. Mark took out his wallet, dumping all his cash onto the counter, a few crumpled bills, adding up to no more than $200. The clerk counted it lazily and tossed a key attached to a heavy plastic ring onto the counter. Mark snatched it, leading Brittany down a dingy, dimly lit hallway. The third video arrived shortly after. This time it was mostly audio. The PI had booked the room right next to theirs, pressing his microphone against the paper-thin drywall. "What is that smell? Is there a dead rat in here?" Brittany shrieked. "Keep your voice down." Mark's voice sounded utterly exhausted. "The bedsheets are covered in yellow stains. How am I supposed to sleep on this?" Brittany was having a full meltdown. "Then stand," Mark exploded. "I don't even have money for a room right now. What right do you have to be picky? Do you think I want to stay in this dump?" Brittany started wailing. "Didn't you say the company is going public soon? Didn't you say we'd be living in a mansion? I followed you here. I don't even have my clothes, and I got dragged into a police station in handcuffs like a common hooker." "Shut up," Mark bellowed. "The tech summit starts tomorrow. As long as I secure the venture capital term sheet, we'll have everything. How are you going to pitch to investors?" "Your suit is soaked through!" Brittany screamed back. There was the sharp sound of shattering glass. Someone had thrown a water cup against the wall. The recording ended there. I put my phone down and looked out at the glittering San Francisco skyline. The $20 an hour motel. I didn't stay in it. They did. My phone vibrated again. A call from Mark. I watched his name flash on the screen, then pressed answer. "Chloe." Mark's voice came through the receiver, heavy with suppressed rage. "Unfreeze my credit cards. I don't have the authorization for that," I said, leaning back into the sofa. "The cards are under your primary account. How could you not have authorization?" He hissed through gritted teeth. "I reported them stolen," I replied coolly. "Lifting a fraud lock requires me to go to a physical bank branch in person. I am heavily pregnant and it's pouring rain outside. I'm not leaving my suite. Do you really have to push things to the absolute extreme?" Mark breathed heavily into the mic. "Tomorrow is the summit. How do you expect me to meet the investors looking like this?" "That sounds like your problem," I said. "Do you really think I can't survive without you?" Mark sneered, his ego flaring up. "When I get that VC funding tomorrow, the first thing I'm going to do is throw the cash right in your smug face." "Okay, I'll be waiting." I hung up. I went into my settings and blocked his number. I stood up, walked into the marble bathroom, and ran a hot bath. Steam quickly filled the room. I stripped off my clothes and sank into the tub, letting the warm water envelop my body. I closed my eyes, plotting out tomorrow's exact moves. Tomorrow was the opening day of the summit. He thought he could secure the investment. He thought he could turn his life around. I was going to shatter that fake halo into a million pieces at the exact moment he felt most invincible. I stepped out of the tub, dried off, and opened my suitcase. I pulled out a custom-tailored, pure black business suit and hung it neatly in the closet. "See you tomorrow." At 7:00 a.m., the San Francisco sky turned a pale, grayish white. I sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows holding a glass of warm water. The phone on the table began to buzz. The caller ID read, "Susan Henderson, Mark's mother." I set down my glass. With one hand, I swiped to answer. With the other, I tapped the recording app on my screen. The red timer dot began to flash. "Chloe!" Susan's shrill voice immediately assaulted my eardrum. "You shut off Mark's credit cards?" I looked out at the ocean waves violently crashing against the rocks below. "He called me last night begging for money," Susan panted dramatically. "He said you kicked him out. He had to stay in some broken-down motel without even a window. What exactly is wrong with your brain?" "He brought his mistress to my hotel room," I said, my tone flat. "What does another woman matter?" Susan shouted, waving away the infidelity. "Mark is a powerful businessman. Entertaining clients and playing along is just part of doing business. And you have to cause a massive scene over this? You're a pregnant woman. Instead of staying home where you belong, you fly all the way to San Francisco to spy on him, and you actually think you're in the right? I picked up my water glass, took a sip, and swallowed. I'm not spying on him, I said. I'm simply managing my finances. Your finances? You married into the Henderson family. Your money is the Henderson family's money. Susan let out a cold, mocking laugh. Let me tell you something. Mark is going to sign a massive, life-changing contract at the summit today. Do not go down there and embarrass him. You march to the bank right now, unfreeze those cards, and wire 50 grand to his account for emergencies. I opened the apps running in the background of my phone, switching over to my shared accounting spreadsheet. And then, I asked, and then you go apologize to him. Men need their pride. Susan continued in her dictatorial tone. Soften your attitude and we'll agree to let this whole ugly incident pass. Once he secures that $10 million funding, you'll get to enjoy the benefits of his success. I looked at the transaction ledger on my screen, row after row of data. Susan, I addressed her sharply by her first name. The other end of the line went dead silent for a second. How dare you speak to me that way? You have no respect for your elders, Susan yelled. April 15th of last year, I read the numbers straight off the screen. You claimed the roof on the old family house in Ohio was collapsing and needed emergency repairs. You took $200,000 from me. Susan choked on her words. Her breathing hitched. August 9th of the same year. You claimed you were having heart palpitations and needed to see an out-of-network specialist. You took $50,000. I scrolled down. But that money was wired directly to a luxury travel agency. You and your friends went on a 2-week European vacation. It wasn't easy for me to raise Mark. I spent a little money to finally enjoy my life. And you're going to hold that over my head? Susan scrambled for excuses. I ignored her. I switched out of the ledger and opened Instagram. Jessica Henderson's profile picture had a fresh update ring. I clicked her story. It was a photo collage. Right in the center was an orange Hermes Birkin bag, sitting on a table at one of the most exclusive revolving restaurants in New York. The caption read, "Thanks to my big bro for the generous sponsorship. Some people are cheap, but when my brother spends, it's limited edition. Eat your heart out, you ugly old hag." The timestamp was yesterday at 3:00 p.m. Yesterday afternoon, your daughter Jessica bought a limited edition handbag. I switched back to the call. The price tag was $60,000, swiped on the authorized Amex card under my name, the exact card Mark gave her. Susan was silent for 2 seconds. Jessica's birthday is coming up. Her brother got her a gift. Why are you being so petty? She raised her voice, trying to cover her glaring guilt. This is considered marital property, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Mark Henderson does not have the legal right to blow it all on his own. Every single dollar you and your daughter siphoned from me has a documented paper trail bank transfers, receipts, credit statements. It totals $700,000. Why are you calculating this? Are you trying to start a war with us? Susan shrieked. I'm just giving you formal notice. I watched the recording timer tick upwards. I will be taking every last cent back. You wouldn't dare. Believe it or not, I will make Mark divorce you. You're pregnant with a worthless girl anyway, and you really think you hold all the cards? I didn't bother replying. I pressed the red end call button. The shrill screaming stopped abruptly. I saved the audio file, bundled it with the link to the cloud accounting ledger, and dialed my private attorney, Thomas Vance. He picked up on the third ring. Boss. Thomas's crisp voice came through. Thomas, I just sent a file to your secure firm email. I stood up and paced toward the window. It contains a comprehensive ledger of all funds funneled into Susan and Jessica Henderson's accounts during my marriage, along with an audio admission. I've got it. The rapid clack of Thomas's mechanical keyboard echoed over the line. The money trail is incredibly clear. Draft an emergency motion. I stared at my reflection in the glass. On the grounds of severe dissipation of marital assets, apply for a prejudgment writ of attachment. I want a temporary restraining order freezing every bank account under Susan and Jessica's names. Checkings, savings, investment portfolios, mutual funds, lock them all down. Consider it done. With evidence this solid, a federal judge will sign off on the attachment order by tomorrow morning, Thomas confirmed. I also sent over the due diligence financial report for Mark's startup, Apex Tech Solutions. Review it carefully. Understood. I hung up the phone. I walked into the walk-in closet and pulled out the pure, black, slim-fit custom business suit. It was sharply tailored with zero unnecessary flair. I changed into the suit and tied my long hair tightly back. The woman in the mirror had eyes like ice. I grabbed my room key and phone and walked out the door. 10:00 a.m. Moscone Center. The morning sun reflected brilliantly off the massive glass exterior of the convention hall. The lobby was packed with tech executives and investors. Wearing dark sunglasses, I walked in, flanked by two private security contractors I had hired. We bypassed the crowds, taking the escalator directly up to the VIP observation deck on the second floor. I rested my hands on the glass railing, looking down at the exhibition floor. Mark was holding court in the center of a crowd. He was wearing a brand new dark blue suit. It was a cheap, off-the-rack piece. The shoulders were visibly uneven, and it hadn't been tailored. Brittany clung to his arm. She wore a champagne-colored evening gown, but the hem dragged awkwardly on the carpet, and the waistline stitching was crooked, a poorly made knockoff. They were eagerly pitching to a middle-aged man wearing gold-rimmed glasses. Richard, Mark's face was flushed with adrenaline, a glass of champagne in his hand. Our valuation for Apex Tech Solutions is incredibly conservative right now. Our core patented technology has absolutely zero competitors in the current market. Once we sign the term sheet today, we're initiating the IPO process next month. Richard Sterling nodded approvingly. Mr. Henderson, you're a highly promising founder. Your AI-009 patent is a game changer. I'm very interested. Once the VC funds clear, we'll be the industry's next unicorn. Mark laughed arrogantly. We'll be looking to you for strategic guidance, Richard. Brittany pressed her chest against Mark's arm, tilting her chin up, absolutely soaking in the envious gazes of the surrounding crowd. I watched the pathetic display with cold detachment. I turned away from the railing and headed toward the backstage green room. 11:30 a.m. The tech summit entered the core keynote phase. The house lights in the main auditorium dimmed. The host walked out to the spotlight center stage. Next, please welcome the managing director of the lead venture capital firm sponsoring today's summit. Summit Capital Partners, Miss Chloe Davis. Thunderous applause erupted from the packed auditorium. I handed my jacket to my security detail and stepped out onto the stage. The blinding spotlight instantly hit me. Mark was sitting dead center in the third row. He had been looking down at his phone. The second he heard my name echo through the speakers, his head snapped up. He stared at me on the stage. The plastic water bottle in his hand slipped from his grip, hitting the floor with a loud thud, splashing water everywhere. I walked to the podium microphone and looked directly down at him. Good morning, industry colleagues. My voice projected through the state-of-the-art sound system, reaching every corner of the massive hall. The audience instantly fell into a hushed, respectful silence. I pressed the clicker in my hand. The giant LED screen behind me lit up, displaying a legal document stamped with a glaring red official seal. In the capital markets, the absolute first principle for any venture capital institution is rigorous due diligence, I said, sweeping my gaze across the hundreds of investors. We must ensure every single dollar is backed by verified assets. Mark's body went rigid. He stared at the giant screen in sheer terror. Recently, Summit Capital received an application for a $10 million Series A funding round. I flipped a page of my notes. The applicant was Apex Tech Solutions. Low murmurs rippled through the hall. Heads turned as attendees tried to spot Mark in the crowd. Mark sat paralyzed, all the color rapidly draining from his face. The entire $10 million valuation of Apex Tech Solutions is built entirely upon a single core patent, AI-009. I clicked the remote again. The screen switched to a scanned copy of the patent ownership registry. However, after an exhaustive verification process by our forensic accounting team, I paused, letting the silence hang. We discovered that the ownership of this AI-009 patent does not belong to Apex Tech Solutions at all. The audience erupted into a shocked uproar. Richard Sterling frowned deeply and turned his head to glare at Mark. Massive beads of sweat formed on Mark's forehead. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair so hard his knuckles turned white. The true holder of this patent is an offshore LLC registered in the Cayman Islands, and the sole, wholly owned shareholder of that entity is me. My voice was a cold, hard hammer. The murmuring turned into loud chatter. Apex Tech Solutions only possesses a short-term, revocable letter of authorization. I clicked the remote a final time. A zoomed-in, highlighted section of the contract appeared on screen. And this authorization letter contains an explicit unilateral termination clause. The authorizing party reserves the right to unconditionally revoke the patent license if the user is found to possess significant moral turpitude or operational misconduct. Dozens of investors began violently shaking their heads. Several pulled out their phones, frantically typing messages to kill their deals. Just this morning at 8:00 a.m., I looked directly at Mark's trembling shoulders. My legal team submitted the formal revocation paperwork to the U.S. Patent Office. The termination is legally binding and already in effect. Mark violently shot up from his seat. His chair tipped over backward, crashing to the floor. "Chloe, this is slander." Mark pointed wildly at the stage, his voice cracking hysterically. "That authorization letter was signed for a 10-year term. You can't just unilaterally break a contract." I looked down at him from my podium. "Mr. Henderson, I suggest you retain competent counsel to review the addendums of your own contracts," I said, my tone deadly calm. Screaming in an auditorium will not change federal legal filings. I withdrew my gaze and addressed the entire room. Apex Tech Solutions has been stripped of its core intellectual property. It is now nothing but a hollow shell riddled with debt. I leaned into the microphone. Summit Capital Partners is officially rejecting any and all funding applications from Apex Tech Solutions, and we are placing the founder on our permanent Do Not Invest list. I strongly advise everyone in this room to exercise extreme caution before associating with this entity. I turned off the microphone, turned on my heel, and walked off the stage. Event security quickly formed a perimeter, escorting me through the chaotic crowd. Camera flashes went off like strobe lights behind me. I retreated to the VIP green room backstage, sat in a leather armchair, twisted the cap off a bottle of Fiji water, and took a sip. Seconds later, noisy footsteps and furious shouting erupted in the hallway. "Let me in! Get out of my way!" The heavy green room door was shoved open. Mark barged in, struggling against two massive security guards who had him by the arms. Brittany hovered behind him, her face completely pale. "Chloe, what the hell are you doing?" Mark's eyes were bloodshot. He thrashed against the guards like a cornered animal. "Are you really not going to stop until you completely destroy me? What good does my bankruptcy do you?" I set down the water bottle and crossed my legs. "I merely provided the investors with a factual risk assessment. You knew exactly how important today was for me." Mark roared. "You killed the patent! Every single VC in that room just ran for the hills. I can't even cover next month's payroll. When the kid in your belly is born, how are you going to feed it?" He actually had the audacity to bring up the child. I watched his pathetic, theatrical meltdown in total silence. Suddenly, Brittany stepped out from behind him and grabbed his arm. "Mr. Henderson, don't beg her." She bit her lip, digging into her cheap handbag to pull out a folded piece of paper. "We still have hope." Mark whipped his head around to look at her. Brittany shoved the paper into his hand. "I was going to wait until the summit was over to tell you, to give you a surprise." Brittany touched her belly, forcing crocodile tears into her eyes. "Mr. Henderson, I'm pregnant. I just went to the doctor this morning. 6 weeks. The doctor said all the indicators are perfect. It's a boy." Mark froze entirely. He looked down at the paper. It was a printed ultrasound scan. Within seconds, his expression violently contorted. The blinding rage melted away, replaced by a sick, manic euphoria. "A boy," Mark muttered to himself. I have a son. My heir." Brittany leaned heavily onto his shoulder. "Mr. Henderson, if the company goes under, let it go under. We still have millions in the corporate accounts. We can drain the cash, move overseas with our son, and start over. We don't need to put up with this horrible woman." Mark jerked his head up, his eyes gleaming with a terrifying, desperate light. "Right, the cash reserves." He crumpled the ultrasound scan in his fist. "The company accounts still have over $1 million in liquid funds. That's all client capital I personally brought in." He pointed a finger at me, a smug, venomous sneer twisting his face. "Chloe, you think you won? You tanked the company. But don't think you're getting a single cent of that cash. I have a son now. Every dollar I have is going to my boy. You and that worthless girl you're carrying won't see a dime." He grabbed Brittany's hand. "Let's go. We're going straight back to the office to wire the funds offshore." They turned and stormed out of the green room. The security guards pulled the door shut, and the room fell completely silent once more. I picked up my phone from the side table. The little soap opera they just performed was riddled with holes. I opened my secure email app. In my inbox sat an encrypted file from the private investigator, delivered exactly 10 minutes ago. I entered the decryption key and unzipped the folder. The first file was a screenshot of an order confirmation from a dark web marketplace. Item: counterfeit medical diagnosis form and custom ultrasound scan. Recipient: Brittany White. Delivery address: Starlight Motel, room 203. Order time: 1:30 a.m. last night. Delivery time: 6:00 a.m. this morning. The second file was an Excel spreadsheet detailing Brittany's financial history. It was a disaster. She had taken out high-interest payday loans from 7 different predatory lending platforms. Between the principal and the exorbitant interest, she was 200 grand in the hole. Attached were screenshots of vicious text messages from loan shark collectors. Pay up. If the wire doesn't hit tomorrow, we're blasting your escort photos to everyone in your hometown. I swiped past the threats and opened the third file. Apex Tech Solutions' internal financial ledger and corporate bank statements. The PI had bribed Mark's disgruntled former accountant to pull the raw data. Over the past 6 months, Mark had instructed Brittany to draft 24 fake procurement contracts, slowly siphoning the company's operating capital into 2 private offshore accounts. The total amount embezzled was $1.5 million. $1 million of that was the startup capital I had fronted him years ago. He wasn't just planning to cut and run. He had been systematically gutting the company from the inside. I stared at the irrefutable evidence on my screen. Mark thought he still had money waiting for him in the bank. He had no idea that just yesterday, acting in my capacity as the majority shareholder, I had filed an emergency injunction for a comprehensive audit. As of 8:00 a.m. this morning, every single corporate account tied to Apex Tech Solutions was frozen by federal mandate. Money could flow in, but absolutely nothing could flow out. He wouldn't be able to move a single penny. I merged the 3 files into a PDF and forwarded them to my lawyer. I dialed his number. "Boss, did you get the files?" Thomas asked upon answering. "I'm reading them now." Thomas's voice turned gravely serious. "Falsifying corporate ledgers, fraudulent contracts, systematically siphoning company assets. It's textbook wire fraud and embezzlement. Brittany's background is in there too," I said. "Forging medical documents and wire fraud conspiracy." "The chain of evidence is flawless," Thomas said, the sound of him flipping pages echoing over the line. "We don't even need to subpoena anything else. This package is enough for a federal prosecutor to instantly secure an indictment and issue arrest warrants. Prepare the dossier," I said, looking out at the San Francisco skyline. "Tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. sharp, hand-deliver these materials to the FBI Financial Crimes Task Force in the city." "Understood. I'll draft the criminal referral immediately." I hung up. I stood up and grabbed my suit jacket from the sofa. Mark thought he had played a trump card. He didn't realize he had just signed his own death warrant. I pictured him sitting in front of a computer screen right now, frantically pounding the keyboard, trying to wire out money that was locked behind a federal firewall. I pushed open the green room door and walked down the heavy, quiet corridor. My 2 security guards flanked me seamlessly. I stepped out into the crisp air and slid into the back seat of my waiting black SUV. "Back to the hotel, boss?" the driver asked. "To the SF branch office." I buckled my seatbelt. "Notify the forensic accounting team to initiate the liquidation audit of Apex Tech Solutions at 3:00 p.m. today." The heavy SUV pulled smoothly into the downtown traffic. I pulled out my phone and checked my flight itinerary. I was booked on a first-class flight back to New York tomorrow afternoon. The San Francisco chapter of this mess was over. But back in my $5 million mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, 2 leeches were still dreaming of their payday. It was time to fly home and take out the trash. 2:00 p.m. My branch office in San Francisco. I sat in a high-backed black leather chair behind a massive mahogany desk. Resting on the blotter was a freshly printed civil court order black ink on crisp white paper, stamped with a bright red federal seal in the corner. Suddenly, chaotic footsteps and a woman's startled gasp echoed from the reception area. The heavy glass door to my office was shoved open. My front desk assistant stumbled in, looking terrified. Mark bullied his way in right behind her. He was still wearing the same cheap, wrinkled blue suit. His tie was loosened, his collar unbuttoned. He was panting heavily, his chest heaving, clutching a thick manila envelope in his fist. "Miss Davis," he just forced his way past the front desk. Security couldn't stop him in time. The assistant said, panicked. "It's fine. Step out and close the door. Don't let anyone else in," I told her calmly. She nodded quickly, backing out and pulling the glass door shut. We were alone. Mark took 3 long strides toward the desk. He raised his arm and slammed the manila envelope onto the mahogany with a loud smack. The flap was open, and a thick stack of stapled pages slid halfway out. "Sign it," Mark demanded, leaning his weight on his knuckles against my desk. He glared down at me. I picked up the document. The bold, black header read, "Marital Settlement and Property Division Agreement." I flipped to the first page and scanned the clauses. The husband, Mark Henderson, and the wife, Chloe Davis, voluntarily dissolve their marriage. The wife voluntarily relinquishes all ownership claims to the single-family residence located in Greenwich, Connecticut. Said real estate shall become the sole property of the husband. The wife must sign over the property deed to the husband within 3 days of execution. I flipped the page, my expression completely blank. The wife voluntarily relinquishes all equity in Apex Tech Solutions. The wife assumes full liability for the $1.5 million joint debt incurred during the marriage. The unborn child currently carried by the wife will be granted sole legal and physical custody to the wife. The husband is permanently waived of any and all child support obligations. I set the document down and looked up at him. Did you read it? Mark tapped his knuckles aggressively on the desk. My mother had a shark of a lawyer draft this overnight. You are signing it today. Our 10-year marriage is over. Don't blame me for being ruthless. You're the one who tried to ruin my company first. And if I refuse? I leaned back in my chair. Mark let out a sinister chuckle. He stood up straight, reaching into his pocket to produce a silver USB flash drive. He tossed it lightly in his palm. I just came from UCSF Medical Center to visit Brittany. The boy in her belly is perfectly healthy. My mother is thrilled. The Henderson family finally has an heir. Mark's mouth twisted into a malicious, ugly grin. If you don't sign this right now, tomorrow I'm going to the press. I will release a statement saying you were the one who cheated during our marriage. I'll tell the world the kid you're carrying belongs to some random guy. He slammed the flash drive down onto the desk. You're a high-profile executive at Summit Capital. The VC world runs entirely on reputation and ethics. Let's see how long you survive in this industry when I'm done with you. I've got deep-faked hotel audio recordings and forged chat logs on this drive. I leak this to the tabloids, and the fake news becomes reality. Nobody will care about your explanations. Mark's face was contorted with absolute madness. Chloe, you ruined my $10 million funding round. I will destroy your entire career. It's mutually assured destruction. Make your choice. I looked at the silver flash drive. It was pathetic. This was his masterstroke blackmail with fabricated evidence. I smoothly pulled open the right-hand drawer of my desk and retrieved a heavy Mont Blanc fountain pen. I popped the cap off. I flipped his absurd agreement to the very last page. On the line marked wife's signature, I wrote my name in fluid, perfect cursive. Chloe Davis. Then, I pulled out a red ink pad from the corner of my desk. I pressed my right thumb firmly into the ink, then stamped my fingerprint directly over my signature, making it an irrefutably legally binding execution. I capped the pen and slid the contract back across the desk toward him. Signed, I said simply. Mark stared at me, completely stunned. He had walked in here armed with a rehearsed, vitriolic speech. He expected me to scream, to cry, to throw a tantrum. He expected a fight. He never in a million years expected me to capitulate in under 60 seconds. Disbelieving, he snatched the document off the desk. He held it inches from his face, aggressively inspecting the signature and the red fingerprint. Once he realized it was real, the shock vanished, replaced by an uncontrollable manic joy. His hands actually shook. He frantically shoved the papers back into the manila envelope. Smart choice, Mark sneered, tucking the envelope tightly under his arm. That mansion is worth at least $5 million. With that equity, I can secure a massive bridge loan and my company survives. 10 years of your youth, consider the house my emotional damages. We're even. He pointed a finger at me. Tomorrow morning at 10:00 a.m., bring your passport and ID and meet me at the Greenwich Town Clerk's office in Connecticut. We record the deed transfer. Don't even think about trying to pull a fast one. Don't worry, I maintained eye contact. I wouldn't miss it. Mark spun on his heel and confidently strode out of the office. The glass door clicked shut behind him. I pulled out an antibacterial wipe and meticulously cleaned the red ink from my thumb. I tossed the stained wipe into the trash can. Then, I picked up the civil court order from my desk. The federal ruling was crystal clear. Upon review by this court, the emergency motion for prejudgment attachment submitted by the plaintiff, Chloe Davis, satisfies all legal burdens. It is hereby ordered. A hard freeze and seizure of $5 million in assets under the name of Mark Henderson. A judicial lien is immediately placed on the real estate located in Greenwich, Connecticut. All corporate and personal banking accounts under the defendant's name are frozen indefinitely. The timestamp at the bottom read 9:00 a.m. This federal order had gone into effect 5 hours ago. The federal docket was instantly digitally synced with the Greenwich Town Clerk's database. That $5 million mansion was completely locked down by a federal lien. It could not be sold, transferred, or leveraged for a mortgage by anyone on earth. The paper Mark just took was literally worthless. I slid the federal order into my shredder. The machine hummed, slicing the paper into thin, illegible strips that fell into the basket. I picked up my desk phone and hit the speed dial. Legal department, I said. Send the briefing binders for tomorrow's cross-border merger up to my office. And confirm my flight back to New York for first thing tomorrow morning. The next morning, 10:00 a.m. The lobby of the Greenwich Town Clerk's office was packed. The automated voice calling out queue numbers echoed off the marble walls. I sat in a Starbucks across the street, nursing a warm skim milk, watching the scene through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside the clerk's office, Mark was standing at window number 8. He had clearly taken a miserable red-eye flight back to the East Coast to make it here. Through the glass doors, I watched him slide his manila envelope, his ID, and a stack of paperwork through the slot beneath the bulletproof glass. Processing a property deed transfer, Mark practically yelled to the clerk, "This is a marital settlement agreement. The wife has already signed and fingerprinted it. The original deed is in the envelope." The clerk pulled the papers through, glancing at them boredly. He typed the parcel ID number into his computer. Instantly, the clerk's screen flashed with a glaring red warning box. The clerk frowned. He clicked the mouse a few times to expand the alert. "I'm sorry, sir." The clerk shoved the entire stack of paperwork back through the slot. "This property is currently under a federal legal hold. The title is locked. We cannot process any transfers." The smug grin vanished from Mark's face. "A hold? Are you joking?" He gripped the marble counter with both hands. "This is my wife's house. The settlement agreement clearly states she's signing it over to me. Look at the signature. She agreed to it. How the hell is it locked?" "The system is very clear, sir." The clerk tapped the glass, pointing at his screen. "This property was formally seized by the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York at 9:00 a.m. yesterday morning. It's a pre-judgment writ of attachment. Until a federal judge lifts this lien, all transactions, transfers, and mortgage applications are strictly prohibited by federal law." Mark stumbled backward as if he had been physically struck. He bumped hard into the man waiting in line behind him. "Watch where you're going, buddy," the man snapped. Mark ignored him entirely. Like a maniac, he snatched his papers off the counter. He stared wildly at the divorce agreement. My signature was there. My fingerprint was there. He looked up at the digital clock on the wall, then back at the timestamp on the agreement. I had signed it at 2:00 p.m. yesterday. The house had been federally seized at 9:00 a.m. yesterday. "Chloe." Mark's jaw locked so tight his teeth audibly ground together. He hissed my name like a curse. He frantically pulled out his phone and dialed my number. Sitting in the Starbucks, I watched my phone light up on the table. I picked it up, hit the red reject button, and casually permanently blocked the number. Through the window, I watched Mark stare at his disconnected screen in utter disbelief. He punched his own thigh in a fit of pure rage, then sprinted out of the clerk's office like a madman, waving his arms to hail a yellow cab on the street. I took a final sip of my milk and threw the paper cup away. Half an hour later, my phone pinged with a video message from the estate manager at my Greenwich property. "Miss Davis, there is a severe altercation at your front gates. U.S. Marshals are on site executing the court order. Please review." I tapped play. The footage was slightly shaky. Mark's taxi screeched to a halt in front of the massive wrought iron gates of the estate. Before it even fully stopped, Mark threw the door open and sprinted toward the entrance. The gates were chained shut. Slapped across the stone pillars were two massive, crisscrossing white stickers bearing the bright red seal of the U.S. Marshals Service, sized by federal order. Susan and Jessica were sitting miserably on the cold concrete sidewalk outside the gates. Surrounding them were 5 huge, cheap, black, hefty trash bags. "Mark, you're finally here." Susan scrambled up from the pavement the second she saw him. She lunged forward, grabbing his arm, sobbing hysterically. "The federal agents showed up at the crack of dawn. They dragged us out of bed and threw us out on the street. They said the house was seized. They wouldn't even let me go to the safe to grab my gold jewelry or my bank statements." Jessica sat on a lumpy trash bag, aggressively wiping her mascara-stained face. "Mark, my limited edition bags, my jewelry. The feds confiscated all of it inside. They said it was bought with Chloe's stolen money, that it's illegal proceeds, and they're auctioning it to pay off the debt. How am I supposed to show my face at parties now?" Mark was hyperventilating. He stared at the glowing red federal seals on the gates. He stepped forward and reached out his hand, trying to rip the sticker off the stone. "Sir, back away from the gates." 2 armed U.S. Marshals immediately stepped into his path, hands resting on their utility belts. "Tampering with a federal seal is a felony offense. Back up right now, or you will be placed in handcuffs." "This is my house!" Mark screamed, his eyes bloodshot, spit flying from his mouth. Like a wounded animal, he wildly waved the crumpled divorce agreement in the marshal's face. "This is my wife's house. We've been married for 10 years. We signed a legal settlement yesterday. Look at it in black and white. This house is mine. Get the hell out of my way. The marshal calmly took the paper from his hand, glanced at the signature timestamp, and handed it right back. The execution time of this private contract postdates a federal seizure order, making it legally null and void, the marshal stated, completely unfazed. The plaintiff who filed the injunction is Chloe Davis. She provided a federal judge with irrefutable financial forensics, proving you engaged in severe dissipation of marital assets. The court ordered the seizure. If you have a grievance, retain counsel and file a motion in federal court. Now, leave the premises immediately, or you will be arrested for interfering with a federal officer. The papers slipped from Mark's trembling fingers, fluttering to the sidewalk. He completely shattered. The realization hit him that every single safety net was gone. Chloe, you psycho bitch. You set me up! Mark tilted his head back toward the overcast sky, letting out a raw, guttural scream of absolute despair. I closed the video and locked my phone. 2:00 p.m. My high-security, luxury, high-rise apartment in Manhattan. The building required keycard access for the elevators to even reach the residential floors. I was sitting on my sprawling leather sofa, reviewing the forensic audit of Apex Tech, when the smart home intercom on the wall blared a rapid alarm. The HD security screen flickered on, showing the feed from the camera outside my front door. Mark was standing in the hallway. He hadn't been able to afford a direct flight from San Francisco, so he must have taken a budget red-eye to get back to New York. His suit jacket was gone. His white shirt was untucked, the buttons ripped open, his tie missing. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He balled his hands into fists and began pounding violently on the reinforced steel security door. Chloe, get the hell out here! Open this door! Mark screamed into the doorbell camera. Bang! 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 His fists hammered the metal, echoing down the hall. I didn't move an inch. I just watched the screen. You think hiding in there makes you safe? Mark leaned his face inches from the lens, his eyes completely bloodshot. He was panting heavily. You sued me in federal court? You locked down the house and threw my mother and sister out onto the street like dogs? Are you even human? Do you have a soul? He took a step back, lifted his dress shoe, and viciously kicked the door. Open the door! Go to the courthouse, drop the lawsuit, and give me my house back, he roared hoarsely. I reached out and tapped the record button on the intercom console. The red light flared. Every single threat, every violent kick, was being saved directly to my secure cloud server. You're not opening it? Fine. I'll smash this damn door down! Mark looked wildly down the hallway and spotted the emergency fire equipment cabinet. He ran over, grabbed the emergency hammer, shattered the glass, and hauled out the heavy red fire extinguisher. He dragged it back to my door, hoisting it above his shoulder, aiming the heavy steel base at the deadbolt. I calmly picked up the landline receiver on the coffee table and hit the speed dial for building security. 8th floor, room 802. A hostile individual is wielding a fire extinguisher and attempting to breach my front door, I said, my voice completely steady. The suspect is highly erratic, violent, and out of control. Send a response team up immediately. Copy that, Miss Davis. We're on our way. The head of security replied. Less than 60 seconds later, the elevator chimed. 4 massive security guards in black tactical gear poured out, wielding batons and clear riot shields. Drop the weapon! Put your hands on your head and step away from the door, the captain shouted, raising his shield. Mark spun around, hoisting the fire extinguisher like a battering ram. Piss off! I'm dealing with my wife! This is none of your damn business! He swung the heavy steel cylinder at them. The 2 lead guards instantly stepped inside his guard, raising their shields to absorb the glancing blow. The other 2 flanked him perfectly. One guard brought his baton down in a swift, calculated strike, cracking Mark sharply across his right wrist. Mark shrieked in agony. His grip failed, and the heavy extinguisher slammed onto the tiled floor with a deafening crash, spewing a cloud of white dry chemical powder down the hall. Before he could react, 2 guards tackled him, driving him face first into the cold tile floor. One guard jammed a knee squarely between his shoulder blades, applying a painful joint lock to his arms. Let me go! Get off me! Mark thrashed wildly, trying to buck them off. I am a CEO. My company is going public. You can't touch me! The guard pulled a pair of heavy metal handcuffs from his belt. Click-clack. Mark's wrists were bound tight behind his back. I stood up, walked to the front door, and pulled it open. Standing in the doorway, I looked down at him. His face was squashed painfully against the floor, a scrape bleeding on his forehead, his suit ruined by white chemical powder. He stared up at me with sheer hatred. "Chloe, you're going to rot in hell for this," he hissed through his teeth. "Call the NYPD," I told the security captain. "He is trespassing, disturbing the peace, and attempting to destroy property. Burn a copy of the hallway surveillance footage and hand it directly to the responding officers." "Yes, miss." "Davis. Apologies for the disturbance." The captain nodded respectfully. 2 guards hauled Mark up by his armpits. He sagged like a sack of dead weight. All the fight finally drained out of him. They dragged him toward the freight elevator. The doors closed and the hallway fell silent, save for the cleaning crew quietly sweeping up the fire-retardant powder. I closed the door, walked back to the living room, and checked my phone. The PI had sent a new text. "Boss, Brittany just checked out of the Starlight Motel." She took her suitcase and grabbed a rideshare to the SF Greyhound terminal. She bought a cash ticket on an out-of-state bus. "She's running." I stared at the message. When the cops had Mark pinned against the wall at the Ritz, Brittany had done the math. Mark had hit a dead end. No $5 million mansion, no IPO, no liquid cash. She dropped the fake pregnancy act the second he left the motel, raided his wallet for the last $2,000 in cash, and bolted. I typed a reply. "Do the loan shark collectors know her exact location?" The PI replied instantly. I used a burner number to text the bus terminal address and the license plate of her bus to the collection agency's boss. "Their enforcers are already waiting at the outbound terminal." "Perfect. Call off the tail." Case closed. I tossed my phone onto the sofa. A con artist $200,000 in debt, fleeing on a Greyhound bus straight into the arms of a vicious collection gang. I didn't need to waste another second thinking about her fate. 3 days later, Manhattan Financial District, the top-floor conference room of Blackwood Ventures. Mark sat on one side of the massive oval table, wearing his same ruined, wrinkled suit. His eyes were sunken, surrounded by dark purple bags. A sickly stubble coated his jaw, and he smelled faintly of sour sweat. He had spent 24 hours in an NYPD holding cell before a friend finally bailed him out. The second he got out, he came straight here. This was his absolute last lifeline. Blackwood Ventures was a notoriously shady firm on the fringes of the VC world, known for laundering dirty money and issuing highly predatory bridge loans. Mark had concealed the fatal reality that his corporate accounts were federally frozen. He had hired someone to fabricate a set of flawless corporate financial statements overnight, using his smooth-talking bravado to scam a term sheet from Blackwood. He was here today to sign the final contract and receive a $300,000 emergency bridge loan. If he could just get his hands on that cash, he could flee the country before the FBI fully closed the net. Paul Romano, the senior partner at Blackwood, sat across from him, flipping through the printed contract. "Mr. Henderson, if everything looks agreeable to you, we sign here, and my team wires the funds immediately." Romano slid a heavy Montblanc pen across the table. Mark's hand shook violently as he picked it up. He practically bit the cap off with his teeth. "Hold on." The heavy double oak doors of the conference room swung open. I walked in wearing a sharp black suit and stilettos. Attorney Thomas Vance followed a half step behind me, carrying a thick black leather briefcase. Mark's pen froze an inch above the paper. The ink bled out, forming a dark black stain on the contract. His head snapped up. All the remaining blood drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. "Chloe, what the hell are you doing here?" He violently pushed back from the table, the chair scraping loudly against the hardwood. "Security! Get her out of here! Who let her in?" Paul Romano put down his pen and stood up, his posture instantly shifting to respectful deference. Summit Capital was a top-tier Wall Street titan. A bottom-feeder firm like Blackwood survived entirely on the scraps and syndicated deals Summit passed down. Romano knew exactly who I was. "Miss Davis, what an unexpected honor. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Romano asked, smoothly. "Mr. Romano, apologies for the intrusion." I walked right up to the table and pulled out a chair. "I am here acting as a third-party independent auditor to provide a factual risk assessment regarding Apex Tech Solutions." I turned my head and looked dead at Mark. He was trembling so hard he could barely stand, his eyes glued in terror to the black briefcase in Thomas's hand. He swallowed hard. "Did Mr. Henderson just guarantee you that Apex Tech is financially solvent and free of any pending litigation?" I asked Romano. "Yes, he did." Romano frowned. "He provided certified financial statements showing a $200,000 net profit last month." Thomas stepped forward, popped the latches on his briefcase, and pulled out a massive stack of documents. He dropped them heavily in the center of the table, right in front of Romano. "These are the authentic internal ledgers of Apex Tech Solutions, alongside a forensic audit conducted by a top-tier accounting firm," I said, tapping the stack. and right on top is a certified federal court order. I flipped the cover page open. Apex Tech Solutions is currently the subject of a massive federal investigation involving wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and grand larceny. As of 3 days ago, every single corporate bank account tied to this entity has been entirely frozen by the U.S. Department of Justice. I looked Romano dead in the eyes, speaking with absolute clarity. Which means, if you wire $300,000 to his account right now, the money will be instantly seized by the federal government to pay off his priority creditors. You will receive absolutely zero equity. You are throwing 300 grand directly into a federal incinerator. Romano's face turned beet red. The veins in his thick neck bulged. He snatched the federal court order off the table, scanning the SDNY seal and the docket number. Furious, Romano crumpled the paper into a tight ball and pitched it violently directly into Mark's face. You son of a bitch! You had the fucking nerve to try and scam me? Romano slammed both hands onto the table, roaring at the top of his lungs. Your accounts are seized by the feds and you sit in my office trying to sign a term sheet? You thought you could use my cash to fill your hole? Do I look like a fucking idiot to you? The paper ball bounced off Mark's nose and hit the floor. Mark's knees buckled. He collapsed back into his chair. Paul, please, listen to me. It's a misunderstanding. Mark reached across the table, frantically grabbing Romano's sleeve. My crazy wife is framing me. The accounts will be unfrozen tomorrow, I swear. Filled with disgust, Romano violently ripped his arm away. He grabbed the pristine investment contract off the table, gripped it with both hands, and ripped it straight down the middle. He threw the shredded halves right into Mark's face. Explain my ass. Get the hell out of my building. Romano pointed a massive finger at the door. I'm calling the VC Association right now to blacklist your name permanently. Anyone who invests a single dime in you is crossing Blackwood. Romano barked for his secretary, and the two of them stormed out of the conference room, slamming the heavy oak doors behind them. The massive room was dead silent, occupied only by me, Thomas, Vance, and Mark. Mark sat paralyzed in his chair. He stared blankly at the shredded pieces of paper scattered across the mahogany. His final lifeline, his absolute last desperate hope, had just been vaporized. I walked slowly around the table, stopping directly in front of him. I picked up the thick forensic audit report. I have already submitted the unredacted original copy of this report to the NYPD White-Collar Crime Squad and the FBI. I looked down into his hollow, dead eyes. You utilized 24 fraudulent procurement contracts to siphon $1.5 million of corporate assets into offshore accounts. Every single wire transfer has a verified digital footprint. This is blatant, irrefutable wire fraud and embezzlement. Mark slowly raised his head. The arrogance, the rage, the ego, all of it was gone. Only sheer, suffocating terror remained. Chloe, you won. His voice was a broken, raspy whisper. You took the house. You destroyed the company. You cut off every escape route. Are you satisfied now? This isn't a game of winning or losing. I dropped the heavy report onto the table with a loud thud. This is simply me taking back what you stole from me, and making sure you pay the price for your greed. Suddenly, Mark slid out of his chair and collapsed to his knees. His kneecaps hit the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. He lunged forward, grabbing the hem of my black suit skirt with both hands. Tears and snot poured down his face, completely ruining whatever dignity he had left. Chloe, I was wrong. Please, look at our 10 years of marriage. Think about our unborn child. Let me go. He wailed hysterically, repeatedly bowing his head until it physically knocked against the floor. If I go to federal prison, the baby won't have a father. Go to the cops. Drop the charges. I'll sign over all my shares to you. I swear I'll disappear. You'll never see my face again. I looked down at the pathetic creature groveling at my feet. This was the man who had ordered deep-faked audio to destroy my reputation. The man who kicked his pregnant wife into a roach motel so his mistress could sleep in a luxury suite. The man who tried to leave me with absolutely nothing. And now he was on the floor, begging. Not because he felt remorse, but because he knew he was about to spend the best years of his life in a concrete cell. I took a deliberate step backward, ripping the fabric of my skirt from his grip. Your time is up, I said, my voice empty of any sympathy. The police are already downstairs. The heavy conference room doors burst open. Two burly detectives in plain clothes, gold badges clipped to their belts, marched into the room. Mark Henderson, NYPD White-Collar Crime Task Force. The lead detective unrolled an arrest warrant stamped by a federal judge. You're under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and money laundering. Stand up and put your hands behind your back. The detectives grabbed Mark by the armpits, hauling him off the floor. Cold steel cuff snapped around his wrists with a sharp, final click. Mark didn't struggle. The fight was utterly gone. He stared blankly ahead, his feet dragging on the floor as the detectives hauled him out of the room. The shuffling of his shoes echoed down the hall until it faded into nothing. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down at the bustling Wall Street traffic below. A marked NYPD cruiser sat by the curb, its red and blue lights flashing against the surrounding skyscrapers. Two officers shoved Mark into the back seat, slammed the door shut, and the cruiser merged into traffic, disappearing down the concrete canyon. Thomas stepped up beside me, packing the remaining documents into his briefcase. "Boss, everything in New York is officially wrapped up," he said. I rested a hand on my pregnant belly. "No," I said, turning my gaze northward. "There's one last loose end. Tomorrow morning we drive up to Greenwich, NYPD precinct." I sat on a hard metal bench in the fluorescent-lit lobby, holding a copy of the supplementary evidence receipt. The heavy iron door of the interrogation wing swung open. Two officers escorted Mark out, the steel chain of his handcuffs clinking sharply against the silence. Mark kept his head down, his suit ruined, his shoes scuffed. Suddenly, the automatic glass doors of the precinct slid open. A blast of freezing city air rushed in. 3 officers from the Vice Squad walked in, dragging a woman between them. It was Brittany. Her flawless makeup was completely gone. Her hair was a tangled rat's nest. Half of her face was severely swollen, a dried trail of blood crusting at the corner of her mouth. The champagne evening gown was ripped down the side, exposing a dirty undershirt. "Sit down and keep your mouth shut." A female officer forcefully shoved Brittany onto a wooden bench bolted to the wall. "Officer, those men beat the hell out of me. You need to go arrest them," Brittany wailed, burying her face in her hands. "They stole my bag. All my cash was in there. You are currently under arrest for forging official medical documents and wire fraud conspiracy," the officer said coldly, pulling out a notepad. "We're letting the Vice Squad deal with your loan sharks. Right now, you're going to confess exactly how you fabricated those ultrasounds." At the sound of her voice, Mark's head violently jerked up. The officers shoved Mark down onto a bench opposite hers to wait for his processing paperwork. The two were sitting barely 10 feet apart. "Brittany," Mark stared at her, his voice hoarse and raw. "Didn't you say you were taking a cab to the airport? Why the hell are you here?" Brittany looked up. Her swollen eyes locked onto the steel cuffs around Mark's wrists. She froze. "You got arrested too?" Brittany's crying instantly stopped. She glared at him with pure venom. "Didn't you say your company was doing an IPO? Didn't you say there were millions hidden in the corporate accounts? You lying piece of trash?" Mark clenched his fists, the cuffs rattling loudly. "Don't play dumb with me. You stole the last $2,000 out of my wallet while I was out," Mark snarled. "You're carrying my son. Why did you run? Where is the money?" Brittany let out a harsh, mocking laugh, wincing as the movement pulled at her split lip. "Son? You really think you have a son?" Brittany pointed a trembling, acrylic-nailed finger right at his face. "Take a good look in the mirror, Mark. You're a pathetic loser who lived off his wife's money. Why the hell would I ever give you a child?" Mark stopped breathing. He stared in absolute horror at her flat stomach. "What are you talking about?" "I saw the ultrasound. The doctor said it was a boy. That ultrasound was a $50 fake I bought off the dark web." Brittany shrieked with hysterical laughter. "I just typed your name on it. I was never pregnant. I only did it to trick you into wiring me the offshore cash. But you're broke. Your credit cards were declined. Your house was seized. You couldn't even afford a motel room. Did you really expect me to stay and rot with you?" Mark's eyes widened until they looked ready to burst from his skull. His chest heaved violently. "You lied to me. You actually lied to me?" Mark let out an ear-piercing scream of total agony. He vaulted off the bench. Ignoring the cuffs, he lunged straight at Brittany, raising his bound hands, trying to drop the steel chain directly across her windpipe. "I'll kill you. You ruined my life. Give me my son back." Mark had completely lost his mind. Tackling her back against the cinder block wall, Brittany thrashed wildly, screaming as she raked her long acrylic nails deeply down Mark's cheeks, tearing 4 bloody gouges into his face. "Get off me, you psycho convict! Your wife was right to throw you out the trash!" she shrieked. The lobby instantly exploded into chaos. "Hey, break it up!" 3 massive officers dogpiled Mark, ripping him off Brittany and slamming him face first into the linoleum floor. "Move again and you're getting tased. Understand?" the desk sergeant roared. Mark lay pinned to the floor, gasping for air, staring sideways at Brittany. Brittany clutched her bruised throat, coughing violently. "Officer, I want to turn state's evidence." Brittany pointed at Mark on the floor. He falsified the corporate ledgers. He made me draft the fake contracts. He laundered the money. I'll tell you everything. Can I get immunity if I testify against him? Mark stopped struggling. As he listened to Brittany sell him out, the absolute last spark of life in his eyes extinguished permanently. The grand romance he had bragged about, the male heir he was so proud of, it was all a cheap, disgusting lie. They were just two rabid dogs fighting over rotting scraps in an alleyway. I sat calmly on the bench, watching the circus. The processing officer walked over to me. Miss Davis, the DA's office has reviewed your supplementary evidence. The paper trail is flawless. He handed me a clipboard. Here is the formal filing receipt. Please sign. I clicked my pen, signed my name neatly on the dotted line, and slipped the copy into my designer bag. I stood up and walked toward the exit. Mark, being hauled to his feet by the cops, saw me. His lips trembled violently. He opened his mouth trying to speak, but no sound came out. I didn't even grant him a second glance. I pushed open the glass doors and stepped out into the crisp, blinding afternoon sun. I slipped on my sunglasses and climbed into the waiting black town car. To the airport, I told the driver. The next morning, my flight landed smoothly at the Westchester County Airport. The air in New York was 10 degrees colder than San Francisco. Thomas Vance's arranged car was waiting on the tarmac. I slid into the back seat. Boss, the U.S. Marshals are already at the Greenwich estate. The eviction team is on standby, Thomas reported over the phone. I'm on my way. I hung up. 40 minutes later, the car pulled up to the massive iron gates of the Greenwich estate. The federal seizure seals were still taped across the pillars. Susan and Jessica were sitting miserably on the stone steps outside the gates. They were bundled in cheap, ugly winter coats, surrounded by 5 bulging, hefty trash bags. 3 U.S. Marshals stood nearby, hands resting professionally on their belts. I opened the car door and stepped out. The sharp click of my stilettos echoed on the asphalt. Susan turned her head. Her eyes lit up with desperate hope, and she immediately scrambled up from the pavement. Chloe, you're finally here! She rushed toward me, reaching out to grab my arm. 2 of my private security details stepped smoothly in front of me, forming a physical wall. Blocked, Susan immediately slapped her thigh and began wailing loudly. Tell these feds to leave! This is our house! Hurry up and unlock the gates. We're freezing out here. Are you trying to kill your own mother-in-law? I looked at her over the shoulder of my guard. Susan, your son Mark has been indicted for corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and money laundering. Yesterday afternoon, he was officially remanded into federal custody by the NYPD. My tone was as casual as if I were discussing the weather. Susan's wailing stopped instantly. Her jaw dropped open. She stared at me, her eyes bulging. You're lying! Mark is the CEO. His company is going public. They can't arrest him. He stole $1.5 million. I handed the forensic evidence to the FBI myself. I looked directly into her eyes. He is looking at a minimum of 8 years in a federal penitentiary. Every single asset he owns, including this house, is being auctioned by the federal government to pay off his defrauded creditors. Susan's knees gave out. She slumped onto the cold asphalt. The reality finally sank in. I wasn't bluffing. Jessica stood up from her trash bag. She stormed over, pointing an entitled finger at me. Stop trying to scare us. If my brother is in jail, where the hell are we supposed to live? She demanded, completely devoid of self-awareness. Hurry up and rent us a luxury condo in the city and give us our weekly allowance. I can't be seen living like a peasant. I stared at this utterly useless giant toddler. I turned my attention to the federal marshal. Marshal, thank you for waiting. Please begin the asset seizure. I handed him a clipboard. Here is the itemized inventory of all high-value luxury goods purchased using the embezzled marital funds. The marshal nodded. Execute the sweep, he ordered his deputies. 3 officers marched over and aggressively ripped open the first trash bag next to Jessica. Hey, what are you doing? Don't touch my stuff! Jessica shrieked, lunging forward. Those are my personal belongings. This is police brutality. 2 deputies easily restrained her. An officer pulled a pristine orange handbag from the pile of clothes. Hermes Birkin, elephant gray. Purchase price, $60,000. He checked the serial number stamped inside against my clipboard. Serial matches. Identified as illicit proceeds. Seized. He dropped the Birkin carelessly into a heavy plastic federal evidence bin. Jessica screamed hysterically, tears streaming down her face. That's my bag. I just bought it. I haven't even worn it to a party yet. Give it back. The officers ignored her. Chanel classic flap bag. $9,000. Seized. Cartier diamond bracelet. $16,000. Seized. Van Cleef and Arpels Alhambra necklace. $6,000. Seized. The officers' voices rang out crisply in the freezing wind. Every dollar amount read was a dagger plunging into Jessica's shallow heart. Exquisite velvet jewelry boxes were cracked open, verified, and tossed into the evidence bins. The third trash bag was unzipped. An officer dug past some cheap sweaters and pulled out a thick blue booklet. Chase Bank checkbook and account statements. Account holder: Susan Henderson. Current balance: $200,000. Hearing that number, Susan scrambled up from the pavement like a rabid animal, charging at the officer. "That's my retirement fund. That's my life savings. You can't take that." A deputy caught her by the shoulders and pinned her back. "Ma'am, forensic accounting proves this money was illegally transferred by Mark Henderson from Miss Davis's accounts," the marshal said, holding up the court order. "The court has frozen these funds. They are being remanded to compensate the victim. I don't care about the law. Money in my pocket is my money." Susan threw a massive tantrum, dropping to the asphalt and rolling around, slapping the ground with her hands. "Chloe, you poisonous bitch. You're going to rot in hell. You're driving your own family to extinction." I walked slowly over to her, looking down at her, writhing on the ground. 2 years ago, when you scammed that money out of me, you claimed the roof on your old Ohio house was collapsing, I said coldly. But my investigator checked. You never fixed the roof. You put the money in a high-yield CD and used the interest to play high-stakes bingo every week. Susan froze, not daring to meet my eyes. "You lived in my house rent-free for 3 years. You forced me to wake up at 5:00 a.m. every day to cook you a hot breakfast, claiming it was traditional family values." My tone was razor sharp. "You secretly mailed the expensive supplements I bought you directly to Jessica. You leached off the luxury life I provided. And behind my back, you called me an ugly hag who couldn't bear a son." I paused, letting the silence hang heavy over them. "I am simply taking back exactly what belongs to me. You have absolutely no right to play the victim." Susan laid on the pavement, her mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish. The seizure sweep lasted another 30 minutes. Every single designer bag, piece of jewelry, and stolen dollar was cataloged and locked in the marshal's SUV. The only things left on the sidewalk were 2 half-empty trash bags filled with worn-out clothes and cheap toiletries. "Inventory complete," the marshal confirmed, handing me a copy of the manifest. "Miss Davis, the DA will contact your counsel regarding the restitution timeline." "Thank you, Marshal. Stay safe," I nodded. The marshals climbed into their SUVs and drove off down the tree-lined street. Outside the massive iron gates, only Susan and Jessica remained. Bundled in their thin coats, they shivered violently in the freezing New England wind. Jessica looked at her empty trash bags and finally broke down into genuine, ugly sobbing. "Mom, what are we gonna do? My cell phone got shut off. I don't have a single dollar." Susan's face was completely blank. She slowly raised her head and looked at me. Suddenly, her knees buckled. She fell to her knees right in front of me. "Chloe, Mom was wrong. Mom treated you badly." Susan wept, grabbing at my legs. She cried out desperately. "You can't just leave us here. We have no family in New York. We don't even have money for a bus ticket back to Ohio. Just give us some cash for the road. Please." I looked down at her. I had once poured endless respect and filial piety into this woman. I had compromised my own boundaries constantly, just trying to keep the peace. But to them, I was never family. I was just a host they could bleed dry. I took a step back, pulling my coat out of her reach. "There are shelters downtown. The city serves hot meals twice a day," I said, my voice ice cold. "You can walk there yourselves." I turned around and walked back to my waiting car. "Chloe, you're a cold-blooded monster. You have no conscience." Susan shrieked at my back. I pulled open the door and slid into the leather seat. "Drive?" I told my chauffeur. The heavy SUV pulled smoothly away from the curb. Through the tinted window, I watched the rearview mirror. Susan and Jessica were shrinking rapidly, turning into 2 blurry black specks on the sidewalk before disappearing completely around the bend. I leaned back into the plush leather, exhaling a long, deep breath. The air in the car felt incredibly clean. The suffocating toxicity I had endured for the last 10 years was finally gone forever. 6 months later. The U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York. Courtroom 1. Outside, a heavy snow was falling over Manhattan. Inside, the radiators hissed softly, keeping the grand courtroom warm. I sat quietly in the second row of the gallery. My belly was flat. 2 months ago, I had successfully delivered a perfectly healthy, beautiful baby girl. She had my eyes. The federal judge sat high on the mahogany bench and struck his gavel. "Order in the court." Mark stood at the defense table. His head had been shaved. He wore an oversized khaki federal prison jumpsuit, His back was permanently hunched, his eyes dull and lifeless, looking like an exhausted old man. The past 6 months in pretrial detention at MDC Brooklyn had completely shattered whatever ego he had left. Brittany stood at the adjacent table, also clad in a prison uniform, her face gaunt and pale. The judge picked up the sentencing memo. This court finds that the defendant, Mark Henderson, exploited his fiduciary duties, forged corporate contracts, and systematically embezzled corporate assets. His actions constitute federal wire fraud and grand larceny. Furthermore, his use of offshore accounts constitutes money laundering. The judge's voice boomed through the silent room. The sentence is as follows. Defendant Mark Henderson is found guilty on all counts. Sentences to be served consecutively for a total of 8 years in a federal penitentiary. The court further orders full restitution and the permanent forfeiture of all seized assets. Hearing the final number, Mark's legs gave out. He collapsed directly onto the floor. 2 U.S. Marshals instantly hauled him back to his feet. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just stared blankly at the floor as silent tears tracked through the deep wrinkles on his face. Defendant Brittany White, guilty of wire fraud, conspiracy, and forging official documents. Sentenced to 3.5 years in federal prison, alongside a $50,000 fine. Brittany buried her face in her shackled hands, sobbing softly. The gavel struck again. Court is adjourned, the judge announced. The marshals grabbed Mark and Brittany by the arms, escorting them toward the side exit. As he walked past the gallery, Mark slowly turned his head. He saw me sitting there. He stopped walking. He looked at my flat stomach. His dry, cracked lips moved. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I sat in my chair and looked back at him. My face held absolutely no expression. I felt no anger, no vindictive thrill, and certainly no pity. I looked at him the exact same way I would look at a stranger on the subway. The marshal gave him a rough shove forward. Chains rattling, Mark walked out the heavy oak doors, disappearing down the long, dark corridor forever. I stood up, pulled on my tailored wool trench coat, and walked out of the courthouse. The snow had just stopped. The brilliant winter sun broke through the clouds, reflecting blindingly off the white powder covering the Foley Square steps. I took a deep breath of the freezing, crisp air. My mind had never been clearer. My driver had the SUV idling by the curb. I climbed into the back. "Back to the office, boss?" he asked. "Back to the office," I said. "Summit Capital Partners, Manhattan headquarters. 38th floor, office of the Senior Managing Partner for Global Acquisitions." I pushed open the heavy glass doors to my new corner office. The floors were covered in plush carpeting, and the massive wraparound windows offered an unobstructed, breathtaking view of the Manhattan skyline. Sitting dead center on my massive desk was a red leather folder. My executive assistant walked in, placing a fresh, steaming latte on my coaster. "Boss, the official appointment charter just came down from the board," she smiled brightly. "Congratulations on taking over the global M&A division." I picked up the document and flipped it open. At the bottom was the ink signature of the global CEO. "Thank you." I set it down. "Also, the first-class tickets have been issued. Flight leaves from JFK tomorrow morning at 8:00 a.m. She handed me an envelope. "The Paris branch team is already prepping the war room for you to lead the $1 billion cross-border acquisition." I took the envelope. Inside were 2 heavy stock plane tickets, one for me and one for my daughter and her traveling nanny. "Is the luggage ready?" I asked. "Already delivered to the VIP concierge at the airport," she replied. "Excellent. That will be all." She smiled, backed out of the office, and clicked the door shut. I walked over to the glass, looking down at the city that never sleeps. The yellow cabs looked like tiny ants navigating the concrete grid. The sun glinted off the steel skyscrapers. I pulled out my phone and opened my photo gallery. The most recent photo was of my daughter, fast asleep in her crib. Her breathing was perfectly even, her tiny hands curled into loose fists. Looking at the photo, the corners of my mouth naturally curled into a warm smile. Life is incredibly fair. When you have the courage to take a scalpel and flawlessly cut out the rotting flesh, what grows back over the wound is impenetrable armor. Endless endurance and compromise only ever buy insatiable greed and betrayal. The woman standing here today possessed absolute clarity and the power to control her own empire. I locked my phone, turned around, and walked back to my desk. I pulled open the bottom drawer. Lying inside was a photocopy of that pathetic divorce agreement and the flash drive of fabricated evidence Mark had tried to use against me. I picked them both up and dropped them directly into the trash can. I didn't need souvenirs of my past foolishness. My future was out there, in the vast, open world. I picked up my latte, and took a slow sip, the rich espresso warming my chest. See you in Paris tomorrow.